In the wildest, emptiest, and most beautiful corner of New Zealand lies a cherished world where mountains and valleys compete with each other for room. Scale is almost beyond comprehension. Rainfall is measured in meters, and scenery encompasses the broadest width of emotions. For thousands of years, natives and explorers alike have found it a place of inspiration and solitude. In the words of author Rudyard Kipling, it is the eighth wonder of the world. This is Fiordland National Park. At over 12,000 square kilometers, Fiordland is one of the largest national parks in the world. Covering 5% of the entire landmass of New Zealand, the sheer scale of Fiordland defies description. The first people to inhabit this native wonderland, nearly 1,000 years ago, were East Polynesian navigators who were the ancestors of a people that later became known as the Maori. They named the region Te Waihipunamo, or the place of greenstone, after the treasured jade that was once bountiful in its valleys. Following their spiritual goal of being at one with nature, the Maori came to know every secret that Mother Nature held about this rugged paradise, and were content to live in isolation from the rest of the world. But it would not be long before the destiny of two different peoples were to collide. From the 16th century, world maps often showed an imagined southern landmass at the bottom of the globe to balance the known land in the north. European explorers made daring journeys across uncharted waters to discover this vast Terra Australis Incognita, or unknown southern land. Dutchman Abel Tasman was the first European to sight New Zealand in 1642 while on a mission from the Dutch East India Company, but he declared the land unsuitable to provide for their material interests and moved on. It wasn't until 130 years later, on October the 6th, 1769, when Captain James Cook's cabin boy, Nicholas Young, spotted land from the deck of the Endeavour.
Things weren't very good for sailing in close to shore at that time. Unfavourable winds late in the day, so he just sailed by, but he called it Dusky Bay. But 3 years later, in 1773, after 120 odd days down in the subantarctic ocean, his crew were getting very tired. The ship was in need of some repairs, and remembering Dusky Bay, as he'd called it, he sailed up to here, found his way back to the entrance. They put a small vessel into the water and sailed in that, and a Lieutenant Richard Pickersgill found a beautiful little harbour in there that now bears his name. So they came out and they advised Captain Cook that it looked as though it was safe in there. They took the ship, this was the Resolution by this time, ship Resolution in, and tied it up and stayed there for 5 weeks.
He set up camp there. He built the first boat that was ever built by the white man in New Zealand. He brewed the first alcohol. He did a lot of astronomy. They cut down a few trees. You can still see where they cleared the space. So he was there for quite some time. He was a great cartographer, of course. A lot of the maps that Cook drew of the whole of New Zealand, particularly the fjords, are still used today. It's just amazing.
At 40 kilometers long and up to 8 kilometers wide, Dusky Sound is one of the largest and most complex fjords in the whole of Fiordland, and also contains the largest island in the region, aptly named Resolution Island. We now know that Fiordland was the work of over 500 million years of constant sculpting as the land was relentlessly ground, split, fired, and pressured by the elements.
They are genuine fjords which have a U-shaped valley carved out by glaciers which then retreated, and then they've been submerged by the sea, which makes fjords, which Captain Cook named sounds. They should have all been called fjords, so it should be called Milford Fjord and Doubtful Fjord, but Cook named them all sounds, and that's what they've remained.
The mountains formed of very, very hard rock in Fiordland, and it's a very slow process of weathering, but the big onshore seas coming up from the subantarctic areas crash against the southern coast of Fiordland and wear it away, so that it's a very rugged and very rough coastline.
Further north was a sound that Captain Cook himself refused to enter on his first journey, as he was extremely doubtful that he could harbor his ship there and still make it back out to sea. Having named it Doubtful Sound, the Endeavour continued north, surpassing one of Fiordland's most charming hidden secrets. Sometimes called the Sound of Silence, Doubtful Sound is filled with an atmosphere of solitude and serenity. Whether it's the overwhelming 421-meter depth of the fjord or the breathtaking waterfalls that cascade down the steep cliffs, In this ancient landscape, one is compelled to whisper. The deafening calm of Doubtful Sound is broken only by the abundance of wildlife that thrives within its protective arms. Fiordland's climate, vegetation, and topography have combined with oceanic influences to create habitats and biological communities that have no counterpart anywhere in the world. The park is home to a variety of birds, fur seals, crested penguins, bottlenose dolphins, and even whales. Doubtful Sound in particular is home to one of the most southern resident pods of bottlenose dolphins, which extensive studies have shown have never entered nor left the Sound, proving that this varied ecosystem has enough abundance to support them for life. One of the anomalies that make the marine environment so unique is the runoff from the 7.5 meters of rainfall that drowns Fiordland each year, making it one of the wettest places on Earth.
There's a layer of fresh water, probably about 1 or 2 meters deep, on top of the salt water. All that fresh water runs off the mountains into the Sound, and it can't escape, so it sits on top of the salt water as a layer, and it's got a lot of tannin in it from all the vegetation, like tannin. You've heard about tannin in wine. It's kind of a brownie coloured substance in the water, and that stops the light getting into the water. Now what this has the effect of making all the sea creatures and corals come up closer to the surface, because there is less light getting through that layer. There's huge forests of black coral in there, which are probably the largest amounts of coral of that nature in the world, because of this unique nature of the water in the Sound makes everything so much different.
The rugged maze of tall mountains often tricked early explorers with hidden entrances, but the greatest master of disguise was Milford Sound.
many years, Milford Sound hadn't been found by the Europeans. The mouth of Milford Sound is so difficult to see from the sea. But eventually, the captain of a whaling ship was sailing by and he saw what he thought was a bay, and it appeared to be quite sheltered in there. But when he got closer, he realised that it wasn't a bay at all. It opened up into Milford Sound, and that magnificent waterway has been visited by just so many people since that time.
Only 16 kilometers from the head to the sea, all other fjords seem to pale in comparison. With jagged cliffs rising sharply to heights of nearly 2,000 meters, Milford Sound had been a hidden playground for local Maori for generations. They called it Pio Pio Tahi, after the now extinct Pio Pio bird. According to Maori legend, after Chief Maui died attempting to win immortality for mankind, a Pio Pio was said to have flown here in mourning. Pio Pio Tahi was then carved out by Tutera Kiwanoa, a godly figure who chanted a powerful karakia, or prayer, and began to hack at the towering rock with his toki, or adze, called te hamo.
Dawn Princess is a pretty big building, and you take that in the Milford Sound and it is quite tiny. And you see other supposedly quite big pleasure craft going through there, and they're all dwarfed by the size of the mountains, and it's just a colossal place. You can't describe it. It's just it just goes right up so quickly and vertically because of that glaciated U-shaped valley. It just goes right up so suddenly alongside the boat. It's just awe-inspiring, really. You know, it's fantastic. I just love going there.
Mountains as high as Mount Tutoko, 9,042 feet high at its summit, with glaciers, permanent ice fields up there, right down to the very deep fjords. For instance, the average depth of Milford Sound is 330 metres all the way from the mouth of the sound right to the head. So that's well over 1,000 foot of water below the keel of the ship as we sail in. Lots of people wonder, you know, how can a large ship like this go into such a narrow waterway, thinking that it's probably quite shallow, but it's deeper than it is wide in places. It's quite incredible.
It is this vivid landscape of towering peaks that gives the area its unpredictable weather and fickle mood. Heavy rainfall can produce thousands of new waterfalls, many of which are so delicate that they're swept away by the wind before they even have a chance to hit the ground. Still other waterfalls in Milford are so colossal that the sound of the cascade thunders in all directions, bouncing off the lofty cliffs with a rumbling echo.
There's so many different ways of seeing it. Ship is probably the best way, actually. That was the last method I went in by, and I think it's the best because you see so much of it and appreciate the grandeur of it. When you get there on land, you're so small and you can only see a certain distance, but when you go right down the length of the Sound by ship, it's just a fantastic experience.
It's so nice to be able to share a place like Fiordland with them. It's a magnificent wilderness and a thrilling place to work. Those wonderful mountains, the forests, the fjords, it's just a place that I never get sick of. And quite honestly, my job with Department of Conservation before I retired from full-time work with the department wasn't like a job at all, it was a way of life. I used to get up in the morning and think, what adventures am I going to have today? It's just a magic place to be.
Milford Sound is the pinnacle of a largely untouched landscape that defies description. So much of New Zealand's local and European history took place in what is now the wildest, emptiest, and most beautiful corner of the land. That a landscape created by such turmoil could be so peaceful is a paradox of Mother Nature. As humans, we are witness to but a moment in her complex history, but she has many more stories to tell us. All we have to do is stand still and listen.